The next scene is between Danny Wagner and his dad, George Eddie Wagner. I think these are probably some of the most affecting scenes in not just this play, but any of the plays I've read of yours, especially because it seems to uh, show some of the strain in Danny and Eddie's relationship. Talk a little bit about that. They talk a bit about Abbott and Costello movies. They bullshit around a bit, and then it leads into the rock opera version.
Well, yeah, and in this rock opera version, we don't actually get a rock song. We get the Andrews sisters singing, which one is it? The In the Mood, which is actually a song they covered. It was a song written in the late 30s, but that's the swing, the big band swing era, and that's the kind of music my dad liked. And the Andrews sisters were in 3 or 4 Abbott and Costello films, so there's a tie in there. And it's basically a scene of just where we get a sense of Danny's parents. After I think they're sleeping on the couch, the music comes up, and Eddie and Helen start dancing swing music. So, in a sense, and this is a good example where it's good, it sketches the characters, but it's done very simply. But again, you're not going to get the depth from a scene like this that you would, let's say, if Danny's father and mother were having a serious discussion. But this musical isn't about them. They're just there to propel the story and Danny's character. So
then Schubert's piano sonata comes on in the alternate scene. These scenes between Danny and Eddie, I may be mistaken, but I think they all begin on an ellipsis. And it's interesting too how it's sort of like mid-moment, and the grown Danny comes in. You already can see as we're going down here that there's a musical pattern as written between many of the scenes where you get these 3 scenes. You get the formal version, you get the rock version, and then you get the grown Danny coming in, and they each rhyme with each other.
Well, the ellipsis is used that what you get is with each scene where there's an alternate scene, you'll get the scene, to where it splits. And then you can either use the rock version or the alternate version. The reason I have the ellipsis and then usually maybe 5 to 10 lines of what came before it is just to say, this is where it goes there. So if you got rid of the rock version, you would just sort of condense those two up together and you wouldn't repeat it, but that's where you would pick it up there, and that's where it would change. So, and the grown Danny here, basically, this is where the grown Danny is basically just, he even says, Franz Schubert, a sonata that connotes unease. So we're getting a sense of the grown Danny acting as the stage director within the play, trying to at least keep the two possible plays from diverging too far apart.
Danny, the younger version, also seems to have a morose idea of his future. I mean, we'll both be dead by then. I mean, in real life, right? And then grown Danny says, likely, well, time to go on to the next scene, and Danny sighs.
Yeah, and Danny...
You remember, just to get out of the fiction, do you remember thinking like that as a child?
Yes.
Did you have, I know you felt there was greatness in you, but did you have a less optimistic stance on where you would end up in life?
It varied. I mean, there were times when I was very optimistic, and there was times when I wasn't. There were times when I would be around characters like the Georgie Magoo character and wonder, why doesn't he get things? There's a photo that I have of a little boy, not the real life Georgie Magoo, but this boy named Brian, and he was the son of one of my or the grandson of one of my dad's friends. But because my parents adopted me when they were in their late 40s, I was the same age as the grandkids of a lot of his friends. And this kid Brian was a couple of months younger than me, and we have our arms around each other's shoulder. It's in the alleyway of the home of this guy. We call him Uncle Freddie. He wasn't really an uncle, but we called him Uncle Freddie. And I remember when I looked at that and see him, I said, I remember he was a nice kid, but he just wasn't smart. Now he might be a average or above average intelligence, but he didn't get that. I remember asking him, what did he think about President Nixon? And he didn't even know that the president's name was Nixon. So I was aware at 4 or 5 of Nixon, and my dad hated him because my dad would come home, and I've written about this in True Life. My dad would be screaming at the television with the latest stuff, much in the same way that people nowadays, I'm sure, scream at the TV against President Trump. So
that leads into scene 5, alternate scene 5, where Danny Wagner and Georgie Magoo are looking for Danny's friend, cat named Friend.
yeah.
And we get the song "The Cat Came Back," which I remember you also wrote about this in True Life, where you had your friend.
Yeah, and I used the song because of a TV show called Zoom on public television in the early 70s. And the link there, I think, shows an early version of where you had these little kids doing the cat came back the very next day. So that always stuck with me. I always, and this is an example where I have a scene that's crafted. It's for a musical. It's not a rock song, but it gives a sense of what life was like for Danny. Because Danny wasn't just going around. He wasn't just in Sunday school. He wasn't just, walking up to John soliciting for hookers. He wasn't just, he was a kid who watched these shows too. He'd watch Bugs Bunny. He'd watch Popeye. He'd watch Gilligan's Island. And he would watch not only Davy and Goliath, but something like Zoom too. And I remember there was a girl, I don't think it was in that first season, but there was a girl I remember that I really liked on that show. I can't remember her name though. And I remember there was, and you're not gonna see it until you see this, but in Zoom there was a Chinese girl named Bernadette, and she used to do a thing where she'd bring her arms together and go like this, and I just went in slow motion. It would go really quick, and it looked like the two arms were passing between each other. But there was a trick to it. She'd bring her two arms together at the elbows, then go one in front, one in back of each other, and it looked like she was passing her arms through each other. And I'm doing it now. You'll see it when you see the video. And I always thought that was such a good TV show. And I think in the late 90s, early O's, they revived it for a few years. It was never as good as the original. Nothing ever really is as good as the original, if the original is good to begin with. And I just wanted to put that in there. And so Danny and Georgie are singing it. And then there's a thing where Georgie tries to sing his own lyrics. He wants to have him on, and he fucks it up. And, so they end up singing that whole song, and it's just a good way to show the two kids there. So
I also think that you've brought a lot to some of these lower things, like pop culture and like farts, things that great artists, I think, before thought they were too good for, so they wouldn't include.
Well, people will say the same thing, that Shakespeare did that too in his day, and to a certain extent, I think they're right. But I don't think.
But don't you think that his? I've read some of his comedies. Don't you think that he had contempt for the lower classes?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a downward look at it. I mean, he would use them, and he would show them, but they were always negative. This is something that though goes well beyond Shakespeare. There's a certain kind of bias. I mean, when you think of working class, you think of Al Bundy or Archie Bunker, ignorant, sexist, moronic people. And there are plenty of them there, but there are plenty of them in the upper crusts too. But when you see, Pastor Stagey, who's a working class guy, he's a preacher, he wasn't rich, or you see Eddie Wagner, or you see some of these other people. Yeah, there are people who are drug addicts and buffoons and criminals and whatnot, but they're also good, decent people. So that's why I wanted to include it. And Georgie, the Georgie Magoo character, will probably end up as sort of a non-murderous Tony Luft. He'll probably the real life Georgie Magoo is probably a roly-poly fat man in his early 50s, if he's still alive and hasn't dropped dead, who has probably done nothing, will do nothing, but is just there.
The next scene is on a brownstone stoop. You have a few teenagers toking up, and it's a improvisational scene where they're talking about current events of the day. Talk a little bit about that. You get the red-headed character that turns out to be Benny, and then we get into another musical segment in the rock opera version.
Well, this is where the Jenny Eccles character comes in, and there was a, as I said, there was a real life red-haired girl who when I lived on Stephen Street in Queens, it was a little bit north towards the other on the other side of the street, and there would be people. In this days, there would be streakers occasionally. This would be on hot summer nights when most people didn't have air conditioning, so they'd be sitting out on their stoops. The older people would be sitting out on their stoops, usually with, a glass of wine or maybe some beer. I remember my dad would walk up and down the block and stop off. There'd be people every fourth or fifth stoop. There'd be a group of 3 or 4 people out talking. Their windows would be open. Some people would be sitting at their windows talking out to people. And on the other side, there were the hippie kids. Danny is said to be between 5 and 8 at various scenes there, and the time frames, the different scenes are not necessarily chronological because Danny seems to go back and forth 6 months, a year, here or there. The Pastor Stagey scenes are chronological unto themselves, but seem to be in a different chronology than the rest of the play. But anyway, there was this beautiful red-haired girl, and I remember about 8, 10 years later, there was a Mountain Dew commercial with a red-haired girl that reminded me of this red-haired girl. And going back to True Life, I talk about the Merida character and the red-haired girl I liked in nursery school. And then there was the second Merida who ended up getting killed in real life and in the True Life. And so there have been a number of red-haired girls that have always been sort of like Charlie Brown, the red-haired girl that keep recurring. So this girl, I said, I don't remember her name, and much like I did with the black character, the former lover of Danny's in Exteriors, that I call Cassie Harrison and based on 4 or 5 other girls, and made her black, even though the real girl I had sex with in that scenario was white. I said, well, since I wanted to use the Holly song Jennifer Eccles, let me just call this girl Jenny Eccles, and in order to introduce that theme, I have to have this schlubby loser who she went out with on a date or 2 come, and he sings the song, that he loves Jennifer Eccles. And then instead of the good thing here, that the character's name is Marvin, and at the end of his singing the song, Marvin thinks that they're going to go out again, and Jenny's like, nah, I've gone out with this other guy, Bobby Pendergrast or whatever I call him, and she doesn't have an interest in him. And so that's how the rock version ends with basically Jenny sort of pinching Danny's cheeks and calling him a cute kid.
As just tangentially, I know you've trumpeted the Hollies. Talk a little bit about them. I know you said that they're as good as the Beatles.
Well, they were one of these bands that were like the Zombies, another group that I think is vastly underrated. They wrote these really great pop lyrics. They had these great harmonies. Their most famous song is actually a fairly depressing song. It's He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, which is not really one of their better songs. But they had a lot of these upbeat pop songs like Jennifer Eccles, like another one is Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress, which is a really good song, but that's from the early 70s. On a Carousel, and a couple of others. And I just thought, if I'm going to have this girl, I got to give her an identity. Since I had already chosen to use Candy and Betty as characters, I wanted to have the main female character. Jenny Eccles is the main female character. She doesn't appear in all the scenes, but she appears in enough scenes that you can say she is the de facto female lead of the play. And she's different from Candy and Betty. She's not a prostitute. She's probably the same age, maybe a year or 2 younger. She's idealistic. She's a hippie girl. She's she would, if this is staged, she'd have to be dressed like a classic hippie with a bandana or a sweatband, long hair, the flowers, the peace sign, what is the thing that was the Mexican thing, the shawl, the poncho. She'd probably be wearing a poncho or something. Although it's summer, she might not be wearing that. But so that's where she came from. And again, the title, the lyrics of the song sketch out her background, and it's a good background. It gives a sense of her as this object of desire, not only for Marvin, the loser kid, but for Danny, the much younger boy who sort of idolizes her.
Then you get the alternate version where Grown Daddy comes in and gives Marvin his poem to read as if Marvin wrote it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a very interesting scene. It sort of uses the Shakespearean ode very well.
Yeah, and even reading a great poem like that doesn't
Yeah,
get
no,
more.
it didn't work.
It
It's
doesn't
sort of
work.
a reworking of another scene where you're rejected. I think you read that the girl with the guitar
Yeah.
to another girl in another play at a cafe or something.
Yeah.
And this is sort of a reworking with that, but with a different character.
Yeah, and basically it just sort of goes on there, and then it goes past the ending of the original version there, and Jenny seems a little bit bummed at this one, and then Grown Danny says, well, in this alternate version, you're going to lose a couple of songs in the scene, and that sort of bums Jenny out because a couple of the songs that end up being cut are songs that she's the singer of.
Yeah, you make several comments about the public domain in this play. I think this is the first one, and we'll see some more as we go along.
Yeah, and I've spoken.
Say anything about that right now?
Yeah, and I've spoken about this many times before. This is a great example. This play should be on Broadway. It should be a musical. It should be up if there's, I don't know if there's a distinction for musicals getting awards. Probably there's the best musical or whatnot. I mean, this is such a great musical. It should be. Now, some of these songs that are only 40 or 50 years old, okay, they should get some token monetary compensation or whatnot. But some of these other rock songs, I just don't see where as some of these bands that, and I only use a few songs like from Jethro Tull and some of the more successful bands. There's just something wrong with stifling the creative use of this, because the mixture of all of these songs from different areas, whether it's the Temptations or Martin Luther or Motown or a hard rock band like Ram Jam that no one remembers anymore except for that song Black Betty, if anyone remembers that. I don't know. It just seems counterproductive to bringing out the best in people because best in artists. But anyway, I've gone on about that many a time.
I also wanted to, before we get into scene 7, talk about the music used in this. And I think you said that you were going to do more musicals in the future. I forget whether it was the 80s, 90s, or this century. But I feel that there's a bit of a flavor of the zeitgeist in each of these musical segments. But how could you make anything out of this century? There's really nothing out there in the mainstream that could qualify. It would be a very generic kind of musical, as opposed to this, where these songs may have been forgotten, but they were popular during the day. Talk a little bit about that element.
All I can say is, wait, don't me. I'll do it. Trust me.
So we have scene 7, scene dropped in alternate version. Is this the first? I may have forgotten prior in our conversation. This is the first scene dropped, isn't it?
It may be. Let's say scene 8, then, but the next scene is alternate scene 7. Yeah, so this is the first one that dropped. And the reason is, this is just a scene where there was no this is what they come on and they sing the song Everyday People by Sly and the Family Stone. And this is a song that in the 1980s, I think, was used as a Coke or a Pepsi commercial too. And it has that kind. There's a famous Coca-Cola commercial from the 1970s. You may have seen it on YouTube. That's I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Yeah. Well, this is, they wrote that song because there were other songs like this, not just by Sly and the Family Stone, that had that kind of thing. And so this is Everyday People is basically sometimes I'm, but it's basically, a pre-politically correct attempt at political correctness, but without any of the condescension and the I guess I would say the falseness of a lot of political correctness. And so here, this is one of the things that would have been cut. And this is where Jenny Echols is the lead singer in it. Each verse is going to be sung. The chorus is sung by all the characters. There's a lot of the hippies or that come on, and maybe in some other characters, and they dance in a ring. This is very much a Woodstock kind of scene, and since there's really nothing in the public domain that can evoke that, I tended to drop that because it's a simplistic moment, but it's a moment that would act as if in the pure rock opera version, it would be a relief from the narrative. These characters come on, the lights would go down from the prior scene. All these characters come on and they sing this song, and then the lights go down, and then we're back into the regular play. So I mean, it's one of the things too that helps establish Jenny Echols as, if you will, Danny's leading lady of the play.
I think it also has some quality writing in the stage direction. The circle collapses to the floor and giggles in love. Danny Wagner sees this and is a bit weirded out. He uses this opportunity to try and rush out from the center, but as he attempts to run by Jenny Eccles on the floor, she grabs him, pulls him on top of herself, kissing him. Danny smiles, giggles, and looks at the audience as if he is Rudolph Valentino and irresistible to ladies. Blackout.
Yeah, and that's it. And again, so you could even argue this is young Danny's fantasy that Jenny Eccles finds him irresistible, and she wants to just hug him, and she just wants to hug him. And a kid who's barely above tothood himself, was still maybe technically a tot. She wants to just hug and kiss him because she wants to act motherly towards him, and Danny just wants to be held by this beautiful redhead with the flowing bosom.